From horrifying lab creations that served as specialized organic servants, to being the saving grace of several other species, both protectors of the Jedi and Republic, and tool used by the Sith. It is seen as the key to immortality. All this can be ascribed to just one technology: cloning. In order to understand how cloning changed the galaxy, we need to understand the cloners, the species that dominated this tech and whose name became synonymous with cloning itself, the Kaminoans. This species would dramatically alter the lives of billions of individuals across the galaxy, though the world of Kamino was extragalactic. It was in wild space, the regions past the Outer Rim, and 12 parsecs away from the Rishi Maze galaxy.
Kamino, I'm not familiar with it. Is it in the Republic?
No, it's beyond the Outer Rim. I'd say about 12 parsecs outside the Rishi Maze. Kaminoans keep to themselves. They're cloners. Damn good ones, too.
Tens of millennia ago, their world was covered with greens and blues, with some large ice caps, a state conducive to the rise of an intelligent species. In this state, the Kaminoans flourished, creating complex architecture, a rich culture, and pursued a deep understanding of the biological sciences. Their ability to manipulate life on this lush world helped them to meet the needs of the countless Kaminoans that populated this vibrant planet. But when you're rotating around a rogue star, operating outside of a galaxy, your path in this universe is even more unpredictable. Kamino was now coming out of a long-standing ice age, and those ice caps started to melt. All of the modern Kaminoan advances happened within this ice age, but 19,000 years before the Battle of Yavin marked the start of the Great Flood.
The glassy eyes, long necks, and sleek bodies of the bipedal indigenes spoke to a marine past, though in fact they had been land dwellers for millions of years, preceding a great flood that had inundated Kamino.
The stored-up water was unleashed, and though they were expert builders and biologists, they had not yet mastered space travel. They couldn't just flee their homeworld, and there wasn't even a Kaminoan colony in the neighboring moons. But interestingly, at this time they did know of the Galactic Republic. How this extragalactic species knew about them is uncertain. It may have been from travelers that visited, or perhaps the Kaminoans were able to detect the large electromagnetic signature of a galaxy-spanning civilization. However it was that they knew about the Republic, even in a time of possible extinction, they refused to send out any probes or messages asking for help, being worried that a neighboring civilization of vastly superior space travel capabilities could easily conquer Kamino. Instead, they turned to their expertise in biology and engineering. As floodwaters rose, they started constructing their stilt cities. These pylons were secured deep into the new seabed and would put the cities just above max water level. Domed complexes would all be linked via a series of platforms and bridges, with each specializing in different things. Their old capital of Durham City would eventually be covered in 3 kilometers of water, but due to its high altitude, it became one of the easiest to get to in these post-Diluvian times. One of the only things that the Kaminoans did that could be seen as spiritual was a pilgrimage to Durham City. Looking at their sunken capital, it is unclear what message they saw, but it was described as a way to, quote, contemplate their existence. And that existence would completely change in these new stilt cities. The cultural zeitgeist was obsessed with pursuing the utmost in efficiency. Cities would be directed to singular tasks, gears in a machine that was directed by the ruling council. They would clone their food from DNA samples and process the water for drinking. But breeding was one of the biggest problems. Overpopulation is a great threat to a civilization with difficult to harvest natural resources, all cooped up on these platforms. Every square foot of living space, every calorie, all had to be used to better the species. So the council decided it was necessary to ensure that only the most likely to help society be permitted to live. The Kaminoans did not simply clone their best and brightest, however. They still procreated naturally, though we might expect some level of genetic manipulation in the womb. And the council regulated who was able to procreate and at what rate. And they must have been proactive in preventing unwanted Kaminoan births, both through abortions and pairs that went past quota, and sterilization of those whose line was determined to come to an end. And it should be noted that some say that these city complexes themselves point to a cold and calculating hand deciding the fates of billions. Remember, the pre-flood Kaminoans were spread all over their green world, and had a very high-tech civilization. After the flood, all accounts state that a global population was maintained at just 1 billion. Though that is a lot, we can expect that they had a global population of several billion, many of which were not allowed into these stilt cities. The doomed population is not likely to have drowned in peace, and so there is speculation that the ruling council may have carried out an enormous genocide during a civil war, to protect these newly built complexes and secure the Chosen Ones. Kamino may be a war-torn land, all covered up by kilometers of water. But as the centuries passed, the Council also realized that one's eye color heavily correlated to proficiency in different tasks. This eventually became enshrined in law as a sort of caste system, with gray eyes being for administration, yellow for the skilled work, including cloning, and blue eyes for the manual labor. Because there was not a total manipulation of Kaminoans themselves, there were at times genetic aberrations, like green-eyed Kaminoans, which were all killed shortly after birth. As dark as that is, it points to even the ruling council understanding that there was something fundamentally Kaminoan that would be lost if they tinkered with every aspect of their biology. Their ability to design the next generation exactly as they saw fit, or even just perpetually clone the best among them, are both options that could have been easily resorted to in these difficult times. But instead they go with natural courting, natural insemination, and natural birth. The only aspect of Kaminoan society that is allowed even the slightest risk of inefficiency. It wouldn't be until the year 4500 BBY that the Republic would become aware of the Kaminoans. After the devastation of the Great Jedi Library of Ossus, a Jedi Master hid important artifacts in the ruins of Darum City. Following what may have been first contact, you start to see some import to and export from the mysterious water world. Old Republic era assassins would use a poisoned Kyber dart. It has no relation to the Kyber crystal, but got its name because it was so powerful, containing a lab-made poison more deadly than anything found in nature, as well as anything else on the black market. As materials became harder and harder to find, and wear and tear took its toll in the stilled cities, the Kaminoans found themselves in need of even more imports. They had to find another commodity to export, and so again their civilization would be saved by cloning. Visitors often noted that the Kaminoans always seemed respectful and excited to help their clients, but also that the evidence that these were people consumed with efficiency could be seen in everything from their living quarters and public spaces, all ultra-minimalistic and with a sterileness usually only found in laboratory settings. Those with enough credits could purchase their own clones, which were used for various purposes. Some of the first clients were mercenaries, who now had the option of custom-made private armies, while others found genetically tailored organics to be superior workers than droids. Over time, this industry would grow, and this stream of clone orders helped to keep the civilization afloat. The Republic banned all cloning of sentient beings, only allowing labs to produce replacement organs and body parts. The Kaminoans would of course do both, and for the clientele they attracted, the long trip outside the galaxy was well worth it, and this remained lucrative for thousands of years. One of their relatively easier requests was from a wealthy company known as the Mask Holdings. The Moon-run operation would host a ceremonial hunt on the Moon Sojourn in the Outer Rim. Here the galaxy's wealthy individuals would fraternize and bond over the hunting of the most ferocious beast credits could clone.
In stocking Sojourn's Greel forests with rare and in some cases extinct fauna, he had hired the Kaminoans to grow clones from biological samples he procured through brokers of genetic materials.
Higo Damask was a financier to the public, but led a secret life as a Sith Lord, going by the name Darth Plagueis. Stalking the hunting fields was how he first met these Kaminoans, but he knew that they could make any sort of abomination you could conceive of, like the so-called shovel-handed workers of Subterrel, the place where Dexter Jetster would first hear of these cloners.
What do you know? I ain't seen one of these since I was prospecting on Subterrel.
Supplying shovel-handed clones to work in the mines of inhospitable Subterrel.
Plagueis had discovered that the Yonkori species were highly aggressive, powerful, and immune to the Force. Great traits for an army of Jedi killers. He had been conducting experiments in his own facilities, and brought the results to a meeting with Kamino's best cloning experts. The problem was that they were too violent, and we see how the cloners have to take everything into effect. They point out that just looking at a brain scan, they can't know how much of the behavior is caused by society, and how being raised on Kamino would affect that.
The Yonkori's violent nature could complicate matters, Magister. A clone raised in a laboratory setting might exhibit feral behavior unless provided with some means to express aggression.
Instead, the team suggests an alternative, from which Plagueis asks about cloning humans. They note that it can be done, though humans are very emotional creatures and harder to predict than most. Something Plagueis was noticing firsthand with his young apprentice, a young Naboo boy named Sheev Palpatine. And of course, they were not immune to the Force, so he still hoped that these cloners could turn these monsters into an unstoppable but obedient fighting force. The Munes live well over 100 years old, and Plagueis knew how to play the long game. They told him that it would take 12 years to fully grow a mature Yunkori. And when they told Higo Damask that their facilities could not produce a whole army at once, the financier dismissed this concern, saying that any funds needed could be provided, and asked that they work alongside Rothana Heavy Engineering, who would produce the necessary arms and vehicles. This was all in the year 52 BBY, 30 years before the opening of the Clone Wars. That same year, Higo Damask would attend a meeting on the planet Sereno, concerning the construction of new hyperspace routes and the effects of those systems' newly proposed taxes. Damask Holdings was a major investor in this project, and tensions between the rich core worlds and the up-and-coming Outer Rim systems was high. Representatives from the Jedi Order were there, and it was Damask's conversation with Dooku and Sifo-Dyas that convinced the Sith Lord to shift his clone army strategy. Dooku was open about his critique of the corruption of the Senate, and vented about how he felt the Jedi could do more to keep the peace, and how the Order was often dragged into the games of politicians, tarnishing their reputation in some parts of the galaxy. But Sifo-Dyas was more reluctant to separate Jedi from Republic, seeing them as parts of the same virtuous system.
But suppose the Republic's goals were not in keeping with the greater good. What if the disaffected systems raised an army? Wouldn't the Jedi be obligated to serve and protect the Republic?
He rejected any distinction, or that the Jedi could or should turn away from the Republic. So Darth Plagueis realized that to truly destroy the Jedi Order, he must tie their fate to the Republic, something Sidious had also once proposed. The tensions between the inner and outer rims must be brought to a war, and this clone army must not be used against the Jedi. The clones should fight alongside them, turning these monks into generals, instantly leaders of the enemy in the eyes of half of the galaxy. And if they could plant their own Supreme Chancellor, then the Sith could paint this mysterious Force cult as nothing more than a traitorous, power-hungry group of warriors. In this fateful meeting, Sifo-Dyas was quick to return to conversation with Higo Damask after a short intermission, and the Mune says that he was simply hoping that the Jedi Order and the Republic would have some way of protecting itself if the Outer Rim forces ever joined up to create an army. He was going to tell him about the cloners, but the dark side itself rises up and prevents him from saying the name Kamino, just as Jocasta Nu was approaching.
Plagueis was about to mention Kamino when he spied Jocasta Nu approaching, and a feeling from deep in the dark side rose up inside him, strangling his voice box, as if refusing to let the word escape.
The Jedi librarian that decades later would doubt its existence.
KAMINO. It's not a system I'm familiar with.
For the next 20 years, Darth Plagueis would remain in self-imposed exile in his laboratory facility, studying the most obscure and complex of Force metaphysics, conducting experiments to manipulate midichlorians, all while Palpatine grew his political career. All the while, the Yunkori clones were tested, but the cloners were right. Even with the Kaminoans' best efforts, this species was simply too violent and uncontrollable. They could not be trusted with the grand plan, and so instead, in the year 33 BBY, the Yunkori were coerced into attacking Republic ships and even assaulting the Jedi Order, all in the more direct and short-term goal of testing Supreme Chancellor Valorum, and seeing how the Senate and Jedi would respond to such a threat. Valorum looked weak, and the Jedi were quick to lead counterattacks, exactly what the Sith wanted to see. As Higo Damask, the Mune reaches out to Sifo-Dyas, and now tells him that he keeps seeing Outer Rim companies like the Trade Federation ordering enormous amounts of droids, arms, and ships. He says he's breaking client confidentiality, but he's worried that they're concealing a secret army that must only be aimed at civil war. Sifo-Dyas says that as Dooku was growing more discontented, the Yunkori uprising, and now these claims of a growing army, all confirmed his darkest worries. Damask tells the troubled Jedi that the banking clan would pay for the construction of a secret army to defend the Republic. Both knew that the Jedi Order and the Senate would never approve it, but Damask and the wealthiest of the galaxy are concerned about a potential war, and he assures Sifo-Dyas that this would merely be an insurance.
You said yourself that the Republic would never sanction an army. The Republic needn't know. Neither would the Jedi Order have to know. You're suggesting that I circumvent the High Council? I suppose I am. The Kaminoans will not create an army for me, but they would do so for the Jedi Order. I have also been assured that a human army, 1 million strong, could be ready for deployment in as few as 10 years. It would be an army that might never have to be used, and yet be available in reserve should need ever arise.
Higo Damask would provide the funds through untraceable sources, And it should be noted that other sources state that Sifo-Dyas had been openly warning other members of the High Council of a coming war, that he was constantly urging the creation of an army for the Republic, notions that were deemed so outrageous that they removed him from the High Council.
Prior to the blockade of Naboo, Sifo-Dyas sat on this council until we judged his ideas to be too extreme.
Indeed. He said he foresaw great conflict, and that the Republic would need to raise an army. At the time, the Council rejected those ideas.
Then it is said that Dooku, who himself just recently left the Order, encouraged Dyas to speak to the Kaminoans. These accounts are not mutually exclusive, and taken together you can see that with his own experiences, the Council's dismissive arrogance, and both Plagueis and Dooku pushing him, all could lead Sifo-Dyas to doing what he thought was morally right, that by creating a clone army, he would be ensuring galactic peace. And so now it's on record that a Jedi went behind the Senate's back to create a secret army. No one would believe that the Jedi acted alone here.
The Prime Minister is expecting you.
I'm expected?
And now to seal the deal, Sidious thought that a Jedi should lead the future coalition of oppressed and ignored systems. Sidious, in his role as Senator Palpatine, would use his role as a friendly but concerned politician to sow even more disillusionment in Dooku, until he eventually revealed his true nature. In 32 BBY, Sidious would kill Darth Plagueis, and when Dooku's closest Padawan and friend Qui-Gon Jinn was killed, he had even more conviction to tear down the inept Jedi Order. He confesses this want to his friend Palpatine, who assumes that he meant that he wanted to kill Maul's master, but instead Dooku says that he wishes to join the Sith, to do anything he can to bring about peace.
Eventually I will find him, or her, and with any fortune, before the Jedi do. To avenge the death of Master Qui-Gon, Palpatine said, nodding. The thought preoccupied me for some time, but no longer. You wish to learn the secrets of the dark side? I confess that I do.
When he is finally contacted by Darth Sidious, Dooku is tasked with killing his old friend Sifo-Dyas. The Jedi Order was on a secret mission from the Chancellery to bargain with the crime boss of the Pike Syndicate, a mission that could have tainted the Republic's image, and therefore classified, and it was even something that he kept from the High Council. But when the Jedi Order directed him to deal with a tribal war on Felucia, he stopped there first. Darth Tyrannus contacted the Pikes and paid them to shoot down Sifo-Dyas' shuttle. They collected the body and delivered it to the Sith as proof, but took the Chancellor's advisor as prisoner. With a deposit made for a clone army placed with the Kaminoans, and the Jedi that ordered it now dead, this fallen Jedi Dooku could take over this project in his stead, still acting as if its creation was okayed by the Jedi Order. But how Jango Fett was chosen as a template has some varying sources. Legend has it that Jango was the leader of a group called the True Mandalorians. Many years before, Dooku had led a Jedi strike team to capture him, but the rival Mandos of Death Watch framed Jango's group with the execution of civilians. Fett would not be falsely arrested, so he ordered his forces to open fire on the Jedi. The result was mutual destruction, with all of Fett's forces eliminated, and 11 dead Jedi, 6 of which were killed by Jango personally by his own hands, seeing that the blaster bolts would just be deflected back. Now that was all in the year 44 BBY, but now in the same year as the Battle of Naboo, Tyrannus hired Fett to kill the leader of the Bando Gora.
Greetings, Jango Fett. I am Tyrannus. I have a proposition for you. You are one of a select few chosen to participate in a special hunt for a special prey.
This was a Force-worshipping cult that trained assassins based on the moon of Bogdan, and this group was actually led by Dooku's old Padawan, Komari Vosa. Dooku hired another top bounty hunter by the name of Montross, but when Fett killed him and captured Vosa, the Sith revealed that this was all a test. Tyrannus was now certain that Fett should become the template of the clone army.
I'll collect the reward now.
Of course, of course. 5 million, was it? Or much more, if you'll come with me to Kamino to be cloned.
All sources agree that it was on a moon of Bogdan that the fallen Jedi proposed the plan to Jango, though there are still legends that say that Tyrannus used the potential of a clone army killing Jedi as a way to entice this bounty hunter to sign up. Jango would be required to live on Kamino, and was active in training the clone troopers in the ways of Mandalorian culture and martial arts. It was the funding by Higo Damask that allowed for the expansion of these clone facilities, and the request to use Rothana heavy engineering was kept as well. It would provide the LAAT gunships, ATTE walkers, and their parent company Kuat Drive Yards would make the larger Star Destroyers. Orders for blasters, ammo, and explosives were all mostly fulfilled by Blastech. Fett would help to personally design the look of the armor and organize the training sessions. He was hands-on with the Alpha-class ARC troopers, while fellow Mandalorian Cal Skirata picked up the Null class. Kamino Chief Scientist Ko-Sai deemed this group of 6 to be too independent and unpredictable, and was going to have them processed as failures. Skirata took responsibility for them, calling them Nulls, but the Alphas were unruly as well. Neither group could be used as standard infantry, so more tweaking was necessary, using viral vectors to conduct gene editing in clones that were already growing, which was combined with a more uniform and tame conditioning program. The Kaminoans felt that they were at the peak of their cloning ability, providing the perfect amount of obedience and creativity, orderly while still being competent killers that could outsmart any droids. But there was one final thing to add: the bioinhibitor chip. There are a number of involuntary actions that are controlled by regions in the brainstem, like breathing, digestion, and circulation, and so this chip creates a new involuntary action: to kill Jedi after processing the verbal cue Execute Order 66. When activated, it prevents more complicated reasoning and emotional centers in the brain from correctly firing, overriding these with an involuntary action. But the true purpose of this biochip was never revealed even to the cloners. To them, the series of Jedi that had commissioned this project simply wanted to have a failsafe in the case of rogue Jedi. These Force wielders were responsible for the major wars during the Old Republic era, so the threat of a Jedi taking on a contingent of clones to wage their own war would look bad for both the Jedi Order and the people who provided those clones. And so having this failsafe against rogue Jedi was very reasonable. Over the course of the next 10 years, this secret army was raised. The only reason it was discovered can be traced back to that first of Kaminoan exports. When Jango Fett used a saber dart to silence Zam Wesell, Obi-Wan turned to his old friend Dexter Jettster. The Basilisk's past is a bit of a mystery, claiming to be just a prospector in the Outer Rim, while accounts say that he was investigating rumors of mining operations that were using cybernetics and cloning to dramatically increase output. This location of Sub-Terrell was one that Plagueis had mentioned decades ago, with those shovel-handed miners that were made by Kaminoans. It was also the sector that contained the Kaladin, whom worked with the Kaminoans to develop some of the best medical facilities in the galaxy. When Kenobi tries to look up this planet in the archives, he is stumped. It is unclear who exactly erased its existence, but is most likely SIDIOUS, concealing Kamino to protect the Republic's insurance policy. By going to the locus of the gravity effects in this region of space, he is able to find the missing planet, and the Kaminoans welcome this Jedi, who must have been assumed to be working for Sifo or Dooku. Kenobi takes the shock well. He even meets with Jango, and the bounty hunter actually tells the truth, that he never met SIDIOUS.
SIDIOUS? Is he not the Jedi who hired you for this job?
Never heard of him.
Really?
I was recruited by a man called Tyrannus on one of the moons of Bogdan.
And we can see that Tyrannus never meant to keep his involvement a secret. When Kenobi tells the Council of the existence of a massive clone army, Yoda and Mace realize that they are already in a trap. The rise of Darth Plagueis, Sidious, and Dooku have clouded things for the Jedi Order, actually weakening their use of the Force.
I think it is time we inform the Senate that our ability to use the Force is diminished.
Only the Dark Lord of the Sith knows of our weakness. If informed the Senate is, multiply, our adversaries will.
But they know they must at least bring this to the attention of the Chancellor and his closest advisors. On the political side, they were trying to figure out how to address the growing strength of groups like the Trade Federation and Techno Union. Invasion or blockade seemed imminent, and the Republic had no army to protect itself. But also, the Senators would never allow the use of clones, or likely even allow the formation of any army. What they needed was a foolish pawn.
What senator would have the courage to propose such a radical amendment?
If only Senator Amidala were here.
Inexperienced enough in politics to propose the emergency powers. With these, the Chancellor could immediately declare the production of a fighting force. Notice that Palpatine doesn't say that it will be a clone army, and you can imagine that covering up these details would be easy to do with such executive power. And later, when its nature was revealed, it would be hard for the public to critique something that was keeping away the CIS.
First act with this new authority, I will create a grand army of the Republic to counter the increasing threats of the Separatists.
With a way to have this insurance policy utilized, Yoda traveled to Kamino to see these forces personally, while Mace led a Jedi strike team that could have captured Dooku and many of the leaders of the Confederacy, ending the war before it could even begin.
This party's over.
When the Jedi were defeated, it was the clone army that saved the day. Plagueis' scheme had outlived him and was now in effect. Sifo Dyas' decision did save the Jedi Order that day. Dooku watched the two armies that he and his master controlled fight it out in great theater. Jango was dead, but his face was now on over 1 million units spread across the galaxy. The Kaminoans were given a seat in the Senate and protected like a fortress world by the Republic. Kuat Drive Yards and their subsidiary Rathana Heavy Engineering now had the best military contracts in the galaxy, producing almost all of the vehicles of war used by these clones. The Mune banking clans would fund both sides of this conflict, and so a galaxy at war turned out to be a blessing for many. Only bad for the powerless civilians caught in the crossfire, and the Jedi and clones that actually did the fighting. On Coruscant, the senators just bickered, and the Order was trapped, not knowing how to outmaneuver this secret Sith Lord that was pulling all the strings.
The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun. The Clone War has.
The Battle of Geonosis was in 22 BBY, the opening of the Clone Wars. 2 months after that, the CIS launched an attack on the clones' homeworld. Here we can see both how extreme and creative the Alpha series clones were, with Alpha 17 being willing to destroy an entire batch of clones in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Separatists. When Shaak Ti contests this, the clone comes up with a plan that they sever a bridge and use the Force to prevent water from flowing into the chamber. This was a trying moment early on in the war, and thus security was ramped up even more. Shaak Ti would command the Kamino security team, with dedicated hangar bays and coordinating with the larger capital ships in atmosphere. The entire world was under constant patrol, protecting this extra-galactic world that had become priceless to the Galactic Republic. But always one with a backup plan, Darth Sidious wanted to gain control of another cloning facility. There was a seemingly ridiculous claim that SPAARTI creations could make a mature clone in less than a single year. The Dark Lord was able to move the pieces into place, causing the Battle of Kartau in that same year, with the secret aim of capturing this hidden SPAARTI facility. That company learned this cloning method from the Comite species, who are argued to be even more sophisticated cloners than the Kaminoans. They used their technology to create only perfect individuals, and by the year 1000 BBY, they claimed to have perfected their entire species. With the SPAARTI facility secured, Palpatine secretly commissioned the production of new clones. Because of this much quicker growth cycle, they didn't receive any of the Mandalorian culture, or nearly as rigorous training. Instead, this process used something called flash memory, where you stimulate a clone's nervous system in the same way as an actual event, and try and lay that all down as memory. A sort of virtual reality experience for all of your senses, not just visual, and that in theory would have covered all of the Kaminoans' training programs, just all condensed and accelerated. Palpatine would order these captured SPAARTI cloning cylinders to be set on Coruscant's moon, Syntax 2. Production here wouldn't come close to that of Kamino, but some like Omega Squad encountered them and noticed some remarkable differences. The clones of the 14th Infantry were inferior marksmen and didn't know any of the Mando war chants. The next year, 21 BBY, the CIS would attack Kamino again. The terrifying Trident assault ships would rip through these dome structures and flood the place with battle droids. Grievous attacked the clone barracks, while Ventress stole Jango Fett's DNA sample. Accessing this machine gives us a glimpse into how many other clone orders the Kaminoans fulfilled. Seemingly hundreds if not thousands. Essentially a DNA arc that would have backups for countless species throughout the galaxy. 2 years later, in 19 BBY, the CIS were starting their own clone army. Many of the details are still shrouded in mystery, but they must have used a rapid cloning technique like that of the SPAARTI program. Bach was one of the only surviving members of a Nikto warrior cult that were said to be some of the deadliest fighters in the galaxy. Much like how the Mandoa culture was infused into early clones, these CIS clones were raised in the Morgakai martial arts. Of course, Sidious did not intend for them to defeat the Republic. His whole production was merely to scare the Jedi and Republic military into conducting the Outer Rim sieges, a campaign that would leave a lane open for Grievous to attack Coruscant, bringing the war to the galaxy's most powerful citizens, striking fear into their hearts, leaving them open to embracing the announcement of a new, strong empire. This Shadow Army Morgukai cloning tanks were located deep in the magma chambers of the planet Seleucami, and Aayla Secura and Quinlan Vos were able to destroy the entire facility, flooding the entire complex with lava, though not before suffering heavy casualties from these elite Nikto clone warriors. In this final year of the Clone Wars, we start to see some cracks in the Kaminoan creations. Despite their assurances of perfection, there were always some abnormalities. There are simply too many variables to account for, and producing so many clones makes it even harder to control every little input. Though rare, there were some clones that were deformed. Some of these were killed or reduced to menial labor, but then there was Bad Batch. This motley crew of clones was riddled with aberrations, altering everything from the facial structure, size and shape, intellect, and personality. But they each had special aptitudes, and when put in a squad together, they outperformed all the other clones. This unexpected result got them trained as a unit of clone commandos, officially designated Clone Force 99, in honor of the heavily deformed Clone 99 who heroically died protecting Kamino.
These guys are clones? They don't look like clones to me. Genetic modifications. They're clones, but they don't all look alike. Obviously.
By teaming up with Skywalker and the 501st, they were able to assault the home of the Techno Union, the gaseous world of Skako Minor. Another example of quality control issues was seen in Tup. It's unclear what caused his inhibitor chip to malfunction, but he carried out Order 66 without the directive, snapping into a trance-like state and slaying his Jedi general. Fives would discover the Sith's plot, learning that he and his brother's entire existence was so they could eventually eliminate the Jedi Order and bring in a Sith Empire.
Organic chips built into our genetic code to make us do whatever someone wants. Even kill the Jedi.
The Chancellor?
He's in on it! I don't know to what extent, but I know he orchestrated much of this. The mission. The nightmares. They're finally over.
And though that seemed unbelievable, Rex, Wolf, and Gregor all found ways to have their chips removed. And they were even able to go into hiding after the war. When Order 66 was initiated, the grand plan had finally been actualized. The Jedi Order was destroyed, and the cloners were in genuine shock. But they didn't have much time to process the Sith's maneuver. Deemed a threat to galactic peace, Kamino was kept under strict Imperial rule. Old clones like Rex would help to grow the rebellion, but on this watery, extra-galactic world, these cloners started plotting to throw off the Imperial yoke. For a people so independent, they didn't even rotate around the same galactic center as everyone else. Taking orders was not very palatable. Despite a heavy Imperial presence, they were able to craft a secret army of their own. But Vader and the 501st were able to crush this rebellion.
A special detachment of the Imperial 501st Legion was dispatched to Kamino, with orders to eradicate an army of clones that had been bred to take arms against the Empire.
Vader was assisted by the unaltered clone of Jango, with Boba Fett commanding one force of his father's clones to fight another. Following this victory, Vader put the Kaminoans to work on creating a clone for him, one of his deceased apprentice, Galen Merrick. At the Tamira City cloning facility, the corpse was used to test the feasibility of creating clones of a Force sensitive. This was long thought impossible, blocked by the Force itself, and something even Plagueis tried to crack. This natural block, combined with the acceleration and flash training methods used, resulted in several hundreds of abominations. Eventually though, an iteration of the Starkiller clone would be successful, though deeply psychologically tortured, as the brain sought to organize all of those implanted memories. He would find a way to escape Kamino, and was able to meet up with the Rebel fleet, something his original had helped to establish. And returning with one of the largest Rebel fleets ever assembled up to that point, they launched a full-out assault on Kamino. Here Vader would face off against Starkiller, before he was struck down by his own clone. Whether this was the original Galen Merrick that died that day, or just another clone, is something that only Vader knows for sure. 1 year after the Battle of Yavin, Vader would discover a very peculiar site on Dantooine. Inside the Jedi Enclave, which had been in ruins since the time of the Old Republic, there was an automated cloning system, run completely by droids. Anyone who wandered into this labyrinthian trap was captured, scanned, cloned, and imprinted with the old memories and released, the victim having no recollection of this process, and thus not even knowing that they were a clone. But one of the most secretive cloning projects was the Emperor's attempt to become immortal. Shortly after the first Battle of Kamino, Sidious contacted Chief Scientist Kosai to learn if one's genome could be altered. Could it be modified to prevent the natural aging process? The Kaminoans and those who made the SPAARTI cylinders did figure out a way to speed up the aging process, so perhaps it would be possible to slow it down. This same idea was thought up by the Null clones under Cal Skirata, who were angered by the idea that they were robbed of half of their lifespan. Kosai had been one of the cloners that met with Darth Plagueis, and was the head of the Grand Army of the Republic project, but she grew to become suspicious of the Chancellor and the Republic's plans. She fled Kamino and became one of the GAR's highest priority targets. She linked up with the Separatists, and all feared that she could reveal some biological weakness in the clone trooper. The Null Arcs would capture her after she abandoned the CIS, and was held prisoner by these clones until she helped to find a cure for the age acceleration process. Then official reports say that she killed herself, but others note that the body appeared tortured, and one of the Null clone commandos sported a pair of gloves that were made out of Kaminoan skin. Luckily for the rest of the galaxy though, this cover-up by the Nulls convinced Palpatine that this lead was a dead end, likely impossible to achieve immortality by stopping the aging process altogether. And he would turn away from trying to slow down the aging process and towards the force power spoken about during the time of the Old Republic era. Darth Bane, creator of the Rule of Two, learned the power of the essence transfer from Darth and Dedu's holocron.
Essence transfer is the secret of eternal life. The physical body will always weaken and fail, yet it is nothing but a shell or vessel. When it is time, it is possible to transfer your consciousness, your spirit, into a new vessel.
And this ability had been used millennia earlier by a previous Sith Emperor, Lord Vitiate. He was able to reign over 1,000 years through the use of multiple bodies dubbed the Emperor's Voice. By hunting down these old Sith teachings, he would be able to transfer his essence into his own clone bodies, replicas of himself that could continue his rule indefinitely. Palpatine started testing with the SPAARTI chambers, placing them inside of the Imperial Palace, the converted Jedi Temple. Inside of the home of the Jedi Order, he would practice this dangerous and extremely powerful dark side ability on these rapidly spawned clones. Once he perfected the process, he set up his main operation in a more secret location. On the deep core planet of Biss, he established an enormous cloning facility that could raise dozens of clones and keep them in stasis until the time came to use them. With the events of the Battle of Endor, the Emperor was forced to implement this plan. As his body was consumed, he was able to project his dark spirit into one of the clone bodies on Biss. He awoke as a young Palpatine, having accomplished his goal of immortality. But there was a problem. As Plagueis and the Kaminoans had discovered, the Force itself seemed to intervene in the cloning of Force sensitives. Palpatine's midichlorians would act as a safeguard against such abuse. And as the flesh was animated by Sidious's immensely dark side-powered spirit, the midichlorians would accelerate the bodily death. These clones would age more rapidly than any clone seen before, and within just 1 year they would die of complications. Sidious tried for 6 years to solve this, but had to accept the fact that this was the price to pay for going against the will of the Force itself. This need for rapidly accelerated clones meant that he could only use the inferior SPAARTI process, compounding this accelerated degeneration. A difficult process, as he noted in his holocron. All this time, one of the Emperor's best and brightest admirals was leading the Imperial Remnant. Grand Admiral Thrawn had rediscovered a stockpile of SPAARTI cylinders, those that were captured decades earlier during the Clone Wars. His first experiments created an army of stormtroopers in less than a year. Eventually this would become millions strong, due to a delivery time of just 15 to 21 days. This remarkable quickening of the process was due to Thrawn's genius use of the Ysalmiri. These Ysalmiri had a sort of Force camouflage that protected it from predators on its homeworld. By harnessing this natural Force-negating bubble, the clones were able to be accelerated even faster since the midichlorians could not carry out their prohibiting will of the Force. The man in charge of protecting this operation was the Dark Jedi Joruus C'baoth, clone of a Jedi by Darth Sidious in the earliest stages of his testing. Before this creation went insane, he had created a clone of Luke Skywalker, using the recovered arm lost during the duel on Cloud City. In these years, the New Republic was rising, and when they discovered the cloning facility inside the old Jedi Temple, they quickly destroyed it. Now in the year 10 BBY, the Reborn Emperor would be discovered by Luke Skywalker. Seeing that this Sith had plans and abilities that no one could imagine, he thought the only way to defeat him would be to join the Emperor until he understood all of the contingency plans. Only then could he confront him once and for all. At one point, the Emperor captured Han and Leia, and the crew along with Mara Jade were able to kill the cloned Luke, and eventually defeated the Emperor, and then were able to destroy all but one of his clone backups. In this new interregnum, other members of the Imperial Remnant went about destroying cloning facilities as well, trying desperately to prevent Palpatine from returning and stripping them of their power. But it would be the actions of an elite member of Sidious's own royal guard that was his final undoing. Karnar Jax wanted to open up a path to the Imperial throne, and he was able to alter the last batch of Palpatine clones. When the spirit of Sidious inevitably reanimated it, the Emperor discovered that this body was a trap. Even greater accelerated aging made him weak, and forced him to frantically search for a strong replacement. The Great Lord Vitiate of the Old Republic Sith era didn't clone his own bodies, but possessed adult bodies of those already strong in the Force. Perhaps with this idea in mind, Sidious decided his only hope would be to possess the grandson of the Chosen One. Anakin Solo was nearly the victim of a Force transfer before the maimed and disfigured old Jedi ally threw himself into the way. Using the last of his ability, Brand, once Padawan to Yaddle, contained the darkness and took both of their spirits into the Force. The Jedi would become one with the light, and the spirits of all the long-dead Jedi would work to contain Sidious's spirit in the dark side of the Force.
If you select a living being, be warned that their own spirit will fight you as you try to possess their body. If their will is strong, you will fail, and your consciousness will be cast into the void, doomed to an eternity of suffering and torment.
Now that was all legends of the events up to year 11 ABY, but just 2 years before that, there is the curious case of the Baby Yoda species. It is of high interest to a man known only as the Client, who is fine with this rare creature being killed. Perhaps he has some experience with how powerful Force users are, and if the baby is just killed, the DNA can still be extracted, which definitely seems to be the goal. The scientist who wants the creature alive has the badge of the Kaminoan cloning facility on his shirt. Remember, understanding all of the factors that go into cloning a new species is a very extensive process, so being able to scan it and run tests on it while it's alive was more important to the Kaminoan scientists. And while the Kaminoans were working on the clone trooper process, they used numerous human consultants on the project. And then there's the fact that the Empire would have ensured human scientists be trained in these abilities once that planet became under Imperial rule. As cloning was seen as a matter of galactic security, the Emperor wouldn't have left this tech in the hands of extragalactic aliens. And even the technology used to scan this Yoda species is of Kaminoan origins. Also remember that the First Order was formed by members of the Imperial Remnant, and cloning tech was still an option considered by Snoke for the First Order stormtroopers.
How capable are your soldiers, General?
I won't have you question my methods.
They're obviously skilled at committing high treason. Perhaps Leader Snoke should consider using a clone army.
My men are exceptionally trained, programmed from birth.
And now it appears that the old legends of Palpatine cloning himself may have been true.
Long have I waited.
And we must wonder how Rey and the grandson of Vader will respond to this reborn threat. Will they destroy it outright, or like the Luke of Legends, join the darkness at the sight of such an overwhelming power? And will there ever be a threat like the legends of the Yuuzhan Vong, whose terrifying Voxen were a genetic manipulation of the deadly Jirok Zin and the Vornskr? The Vong were extragalactic invaders whose entire civilization was built on shaping life to fit their needs, which included sophisticated cloning abilities. And there's even speculation that Rey's dark-side vision, similar to that of clone Starkiller, could point to her being the product of Darth Sidious's many cloning operations. And that concludes our story of how cloning forever changed the galaxy. If you like this kind of video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe, because we have a lot of shorter, more specific lore videos, in addition to these documentary-length videos covering a topic completely. There are lots of topics, events, and major characters that I would like to cover in a video like this. If you have any suggestions, please put them down in the comments. If you want to connect with us on social media, find ways that you can help support this channel without it costing you a thing, or check out our Patreon, be sure to check out the links in the description. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, but most important of all, remember, cloning is a pathway to many abilities that some consider to be unnatural, and the Force will be with you, always.